dinosaurs still live somewhere out there in the world? Deep in the heart of Africa, perhaps? Or high up on some Amazon plateau? I'm talking about non-avian dinosaurs, smartass. I'm talking about sauropods, theropods, marginocephalians. I'll even accept pterosaurs and plesiosaurs for this video, even though, as every virgin knows, they're not technically dinosaurs. The current scientific consensus is that all the dinosaurs died out about 66 million years ago. That's my dog walking away. The current scientific consensus is that all the dinosaurs died out about 66 million years ago. But is it true? Could some of them have survived into the modern age? It'd be tough, not only to remain undiscovered for so long, but to keep from evolving into something that isn't a dinosaur in all that time. The scientific field, no, eccentric hobby that concerns itself with the search for undiscovered animals is called cryptozoology. And I'll tell you right now, they've got their work cut out for them. It's not just that we haven't found any living dinosaurs yet. We don't even have evidence of their existence. No bodies, no bones, no dens, no DNA. Nothing but a handful of stories and some very blurry photographs. Absence of proof is not proof of absence, sure, but absence of evidence is pretty telling. Look, nobody would be happier than me if they found a little breeding population of metaburosaurs living in the Australian outback. But the evidence just isn't there. Still though, is it possible? Well, sure, anything's possible. Just very, very unlikely. How unlikely? Put it this way, over the last 100 years, filmmakers have been doing more to keep the field of cryptozoology alive better than any actual cryptozoologist. Part 1. What is cryptozoology, according to an enthusiastic skeptic? Cryptozoology is broadly defined as the search for living creatures whose existence is not yet proven.
Cryptozoologist. The study of unknown species. That's cool.
Creatures like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, Mokele-mbembe, the Mothman, the Yeti, the Yowie, El Chupacabra, Ogopogo, Caddy the Cadborosaurus, the Tasmanian Tiger, the Mongolian Deathworm, the Ozark Howler, the Skunk Ape, the Almasty, the Orang Pendek, and who could forget, the Loveland Frogman. Note that these creatures, or cryptids as they're called, vary widely in terms of scientific plausibility, with some of them being supernatural hellspawn that very clearly originated in folklore, like the Jersey Devil, and others being very real but very extinct creatures that could theoretically still be living somewhere out there in the world, like Gigantopithecus. Yeah, that's not just some big orangutan in the Jungle Book, it's based on a real hominid that only went extinct about 350,000 years ago. For the purposes of this video, we're only going to concern ourselves with dinosaur cryptids, Mesozoic reptiles. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and plesiosaurs, which means no megalodon, no Mothman, Mongolian deathworms, or Malagasy hippos. I'm also not going to spend too much time on any Lost World films, in which a whole ecosystem is discovered, or kaiju films, even though most of them technically qualify as cryptid films. But seeing as how they're very much doing their own thing, I want to save them for their own separate video. This narrows the field down quite a bit, but trust me, there's still going to be plenty to talk about. Just not so much Bigfoot. 86? It's worth noting here that there aren't any cryptozoologists who believe in all cryptids. In fact, most of them are pretty upfront about which ones they do and don't believe in. Richard Freeman is a cryptozoologist who's garnered something of a respectable reputation among mainstream biologists for leveling with his audience pretty directly about the odds of some of the more charismatic cryptids being real.
I guess we all want to know what Nessie is.
Everybody wants it to be a prehistoric monster. Everybody wants it to be a plesiosaur. But to be quite frank, there's more chance of it being Elvis in a rubber suit than there is of it being a plesiosaur.
Most cryptozoologists tend to specialize in just one or two particular cryptids. Freeman tends to focus on the Almasty, a kind of Russian Bigfoot, and the Orang Pendek, Indonesia's answer to the Yeti. Bernard Heuvelmans and Ivan T. Sanderson, the two men who are widely credited with founding the field as we know it, wrote books on sea serpents, Sasquatches, and supposed sauropods living in the Congo rainforest. Roy Mackal, a microbiologist from my alma mater, conducted some of the most thorough electronic surveys of Loch Ness throughout the 1960s and 70s, and was considered one of the world's leading experts on Mokele-mbembe lore until his death in 2013. Wait, he posed for that photo 3 times? So as you might have noticed, cryptozoology has something of a credibility problem. Part of that is just the nature of the pursuit. What makes a cryptid is the fact that it hasn't been discovered yet. If you ever actually find what you're looking for, it's not a cryptid anymore. But still, is it a legitimate field of science? Well, when faced with the accusation that their field is nothing more than a janky pseudoscience with delusions of grandeur, most cryptozoologists will tell you that they can, in fact, cite numerous examples that validate their field. The coelacanth, first thought to have gone extinct tens of millions of years ago, was discovered, by white people anyway, off the coast of South Africa in 1938. The Komodo dragon was but a South Pacific rumor, again, as far as Western scientists were concerned, until it was first formally described in 1912. And nobody knew megamouth sharks even existed until one was first hauled up from the depths in 1976. And if these animals don't prove the validity of cryptozoology, then what ever would? Well, my problem with all those examples is that none of them were found by cryptozoologists. And more than that, nothing in their methodology contributed to their discovery. It's not like these creatures needed to be theorized before they were found. Now, there are some animals, like the platypus, the okapi, and even the mountain gorilla, that were all known only from unsubstantiated rumors before they were first finally discovered. But I don't think it's a coincidence that none of them were cryptids for very long. They were all discovered relatively soon, within a decade or two, after the first stories about them reached Western ears. Hides were often produced before organized expeditions set out to find living specimens. If you hear about an animal, go looking for it and find it. That's one thing. But if you've been sending expeditions into the field trying to find a living dinosaur for over a century and don't have so much as a Polaroid to show for it, then you can't expect people to treat your claims with the same validity that they do the giant panda.
If you told me you'd found, say, a giant footprint, I might send over an expert to make a plaster cast of it. Hell, you get me a photograph of this thing and I could probably get some troops over there. But you tell me you've got a feeling.
Ultimately, the main difference between a cryptozoologist and a regular zoologist who's just investigating claims about an unknown animal is the insistence. Cryptozoologists tend to insist that all the stories mean something, that they point to the existence of a real unknown animal, whereas regular scientists know that mere stories do not constitute physical evidence. Now normally, asking whether or not cryptozoology is a valid field of science wouldn't be so important in a video about cryptid cinema, but I'm going to be making some bold claims later on and there's some groundwork to be laid. So, is cryptozoology a valid field of science? In the words of paleontologist Darren Naish, from his book Hunting Monsters, Cryptozoology and the Reality Behind the Myths, cryptozoology of a conventional sort really does operate under scientific principles. It aims to be skeptical and self-correcting, with poorly founded ideas and erroneous data being overturned, replaced, or rejected in time. The working ideas encountered in cryptozoological writings can be considered hypotheses. These can be bolstered by additional data and experimentation, or refuted and discounted if the data that comes in makes it look likely that a better explanation exists. That's not the end of the story, though. A critical response to this view of cryptozoology as a science is that many cryptozoologists don't really behave like proper scientists. After all, cryptozoologists often approach data with pre-existing conclusions, and don't reach conclusions using well-explained methods. This all sounds more like pseudoscience. So basically, yes. Cryptozoology, in principle, sounds an awful lot like legitimate science. But given the way that so many cryptozoologists tend to make up their minds before they start looking, refuse to accept null results, and push young Earth creationism at every turn, hey look, a cursed text! They sound to me more like professional yarn spinners than actual researchers.
It's very discolored. It's like trying to find something in a swimming pool full of chocolate and milk.
I say all this not to ridicule the field, but to treat it honestly. I consider myself an enthusiastic skeptic. The stories can't be counted as evidence all on their own, but they are fascinating. For me, it boils down to this. Cryptozoology is not about examining physical evidence, because there is no physical evidence. Ultimately, it's about curating stories about dinosaurs. And who wouldn't love that more than me? Part 2. The problem with Nessie. There's a problem with the Loch Ness Monster. Namely, we haven't found her yet, even though Loch Ness is one of the most thoroughly explored bodies of water in the world. Sure, it's big, but it's not that big. Barely a mile wide at its widest point and only 22.5 miles long. You can walk it in a day. Unbroken phalanxes of patrol boats armed with cameras, nets, and sonar have chugged up and down its length multiple times across multiple decades. It's been dragged and dredged, sailed and scanned, photographed and filmed. Someone even walked the entire length of it in an antique diving suit in 2003, and yet nobody's ever produced a single piece of evidence to suggest that there's a relic breeding population of 30-foot-long Mesozoic reptiles down there, or even just one. No skeletons, no scutes, no hides, no holotypes. Even the purported photographs don't really count as evidence. The world-famous surgeon's photo is a known hoax, and really rather obvious when you see the uncropped original, as is the famous Flipper photo from 1972. There have been, how do you say, significant enhancements to the original. Frank Seal was a known huckster, Tim Dinsdale filmed a speedboat, and the very first photo of Nessie, taken by Hugh Gray in 1933, is so ambiguous, it's currently being displayed upside down on mirror.co.uk. Nobody tell them. I want it to stay like this forever. Now, we could debate the existence of Nessie all day. The eDNA surveys that turn up zilch, the high-def webcams that monitor the loch 24/7 with nothing to show for it, or the fact that Loch Ness didn't even exist until it was carved out by a glacier 10,000 years ago. As far as I'm concerned, Nessie is an open and shut case. But that's not why we're here today. Because even if you presuppose the existence of Nessie, just take it as a given that she's down there, you still have to explain why we haven't found her yet. It becomes a problem on top of having to prove she exists. If she does, then why haven't we found her? Cryptozoologists are generally pretty terrible at this. The most common explanation I hear from true believers is, it's only a matter of time.
I mean, there's been 10,000 sightings of this thing over 1,500 years. If you look at that, and you look at the Birmingham sonar readings, basically cut and dry evidence of this thing, okay? You got...
Michael, that's fine, yeah, that's fine.
You know who generally does a much better job of it? Filmmakers. Every film about the Loch Ness Monster has to come up with some explanation as to why we haven't found her yet before the story can proceed. Granted, it doesn't have to be a plausible explanation, it just needs to be stated. But stated nonetheless.
Somehow, it got by us. Maybe it's hiding.
In preparation for this video, I watched as many Loch Ness Monster films as I could get my hands on, and it turns out the explanations are surprisingly diverse. In The Secret of the Loch, the first film ever made about the Loch Ness Monster less than a year after the first reported sighting, the characters suggest that Loch Ness has always enjoyed a reputation for housing some mysterious water beast.
My father believed it, and his father did before him. Right back to the beginning of things. Tale's gone on.
But Nessie doesn't actually start making headlines until her nest is unwittingly disturbed by divers. Otherwise, she pretty much keeps to herself. The journalist who comes up from London to investigate the claims eventually has to descend to the bottom of the loch himself just to get a glimpse of her. This film has a pretty bad reputation, them that know about it at all, with its own writer having said that it's terrible but amusing. But don't let the bargain bin special effects fool you. It knows its concept is ridiculous, and has a lot of fun winking at the audience, especially in the first act.
Then if it is a fact, it's time to wake up to it. Time to wake up.
Coming, my dear, coming.
And even though the monster itself is famously underwhelming, the dry for wet effects of 1934 are actually kinda cool. See how they added little air bubbles coming from the diving suit? I have no clue how they did that. My point is that, despite its reputation, nobody here was trying to make a bad film, and I think it's well worth 78 minutes of your time. In The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes from 1970, Nessie turns out to be an experimental submarine that the British government plans to use to defeat the Germans, should they ever, maybe possibly, instigate a war against England.
We call it a submersible, ma'am. It travels underwater.
Underwater? What a fantastic idea.
This is a great film, by the way. It should be common knowledge that Billy Wilder wrote and directed a gay Sherlock Holmes adventure way back in 1970.
You mean you and Dr. Watson... He is your glass of tea?
If you want to be picturesque about it.
In The Loch Ness Horror, a micro-budgeted horror film from 1981, two monster hunters carelessly disturb Nessie's underwater nest, which sends her into a week-long rampage on both land and sea. This one isn't good by any means, but it does go balls to the wall on a very limited budget, which longtime viewers know usually goes a long way with me. It can't pass off Lake Tahoe for Loch Ness for even a single frame, but that doesn't stop it from trying, and I find the effort endearing. In the blandly titled Loch Ness from 1996, Ted Danson plays a disgraced cryptozoologist, whose career was ruined for trying to find Bigfoot, who's tasked with scanning the entire loch in order to prove that Nessie doesn't exist.
If there's a 30-foot dinosaur out in the water, don't you think we would have seen it?
But too many people have testified. Priests and policemen, 10,000 others. You think that's some sort of mass hallucination?
That's not my problem. I did my job as ordered. I proved it wasn't theirs.
Only to then find out from the daughter of his local crush that Nessie spends most of her time in a series of underwater caves, where his sonar can't reach.
Oh, no. This can't be. Come on, please. Oh, yes!
Beneath Loch Ness from 2001 probably does the least amount of work of any film in trying to explain why we haven't found Nessie, but then it's easily the worst film of the bunch. An earthquake in the opening scene releases something from beneath the loch, but it isn't Nessie. It actually goes on to kill Nessie halfway through the film, but they never bother to explain why we'd never found Nessie before she was killed. Almost like it's daring us to take it seriously.
That's not Nessie. It's too small. Well, that's not the Loch Ness Monster. Too small.
Blade.
I have seen the monster. That is not it. That's not the monster. That's not Nessie. That's not the Loch Ness Monster. It's not it.
It is Nessie, by the way. In Scooby-Doo and the Loch Ness Monster from 2004, Nessie turns out to be not one, but two hoaxes. The first being a high-tech submersible piloted by a disgraced cryptozoologist, and the second being a cheap knockoff produced by two local yokels just trying to cause a ruckus. In The Water Horse, Legend of the Deep from 2007, Nessie is basically magical. There's only one in the world at any given time, and it tends to pair bond with just one person, making it easier to instruct, and at least a little easier to hide. Plus, it takes place during World War II, when the world had much bigger fish to fry than hunting local cryptids. This is a known phenomenon, by the way. According to Donald Prothero and Daniel Loxton, in their formative book, Abominable Science, Origins of the Yeti, Nessie, and Other Famous Cryptids, cryptid sightings tend to go down during major world conflicts, and then pick back up again when the news cycle is slow. In Beyond Loch Ness from 2008, Nessie is so bold as to murder a trio of researchers in the 1970s, but then relocates to Lake Superior through a series of underwater passages to the sea. Apparently, she and her offspring go on a rampage every breeding season at a different lake each time, and the fact that she relocates every year keeps her from getting caught. It's a Sci-Fi Channel original movie, what do you want? And finally, there's Nessie and Me from 2016, which doesn't take place at Loch Ness, so I guess it's not a true Nessie film, but I wanted to include it anyway because it offers what is probably my favorite explanation of them all. Nessie is like this mischievous trickster who gaslights this one poor guy into ruining his career and alienating his entire family by appearing only to him.
It's checking out time! You've been scaring so many kids for so many years, it's time for you to finally go way down under with the rest of the Dinocrocs and Piranhacondas.
That's still not every Loch Ness Monster film ever made. Heck, they released another one as I was in production on this video, also titled The Loch Ness Horror, but this is every one that I could get my hands on here in the States. I'm sorry I couldn't track down any copies of Nessie, Das verrückteste Monster der Welt. Not with English subtitles anyway. Maybe I'll do like a Patreon exclusive video about them all later down the road.
Vielleicht ist es ein Baby. Du glaubst, es gibt auch ein Nessie-Baby?
You know what? No. That's not the sort of content that should be paywalled. So as for why we haven't found Nessie yet, we have disturbed nests, underwater caverns, subterranean passages to the sea, elaborate hoaxes, janky hoaxes, deliberate obfuscation on the part of Nessie, and magic. Now, I'm not saying any of these explanations are very likely, or even very possible, with basically everything but hoaxes and magic having already been debunked. But the point I'm trying to make is that the people who make films about the Loch Ness Monster are basically doing essentially the same work as the people renting boats and paddling out into the loch. That's probably the most controversial thing I'm gonna say in this video. I know a lot of cryptozoologists won't like it, but stick with me here. So long as there's no physical evidence to examine, all we've got are stories.
And what does it matter if you collect them with a canoe or a camera?
This is why I think studying cryptid films is just as important to the study of cryptozoology as is studying actual cryptids. Because these films are more than mere dramatizations of cryptozoology, they're actual manifestations of it.
You want proof? It doesn't seem in keeping with the subject, but I'll give it to you anyway. See, contrary to popular belief, the Loch Ness Monster didn't birth all these cryptid films. It's the other way around. Cryptid films birthed the Loch Ness Monster. Bum bum bum! Part 3. This section is still about Nessie, but I felt like we needed an act break.
You might be surprised to learn that the first reported Nessie sighting is less than 100 years old. Nessie is younger than my grandfather.
It was April 15th, 1933, and it's pretty anticlimactic. The creature disported itself, rolling and plunging for fully a minute, its body resembling that of a whale, and the water cascading and churning like a simmering cauldron. Soon, however, it disappeared in a boiling mass of foam.
That's it. That's the first reported sighting.
Pretty nondescript. It doesn't even give a size estimate. It could be anything. Some Nessie proponents will cite a medieval text from 565 AD, which describes an encounter with a water beast in River Ness as evidence that Nessie sightings have been going on for centuries. And some movies will repeat this claim.
In 500 AD, St. Columba saw the beastie approaching a swimmer. "Turn back, beastie, let the man be," he's reported to have shouted. It submerged.
But that account, a biography of Irish monk St. Columba written 100 years after his death, contains no actual description of the creature in question, only that it roared with a wide open mouth, and also includes stories of St. Columba turning water into wine, raising people from the dead, and my personal favorite, enchanting a stick so that wild animals would impale themselves on it every night. Hardly what I'd call a reliable source. No, the sightings didn't start till 1933. Well, that's because a road wasn't built around the loch until 1933.
No, that's not true either.
According to the original report published by the Inverness Courier, Nessie was first sighted by Aldi and John Mackay whilst driving along the A82 road near Abraken. Sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. That road was completed in 1809. It underwent a major renovation in the 1930s, but both water and wagon traffic in and around the loch have been regular and frequent for centuries.
So what changed in 1933? What changed in April 1933? Well, just 5 days before the first alleged sighting, a certain film had its UK premiere over in London.
King Kong tells the story of...
You know what King Kong is about.
What's relevant to our story is that the film was a smash hit, with crowds being turned away in record numbers at the London Coliseum. There are no plesiosaurs in the film, but there is a sequence in which a sauropod emerges from the water and attacks Carl Denham's expedition. Just 4 months later, the Inverness Courier published a second reported sighting of Nessie from vacationing Londoner George Spicer, and this one was far more descriptive than the first. It crossed my road about 50 yards ahead and appeared to be carrying a small lamb or animal of some kind. It seemed to have a long neck which moved up and down in a manner of a scenic railway, and the body was fairly big with a high back. Here's an artist's impression of what he saw. Sound familiar? Look familiar? Spicer was very specific. He described the creature crossing the road from left to right with a very long neck which moved rapidly up and down in curves. It had skin like a dirty elephant or a rhinoceros and was about 25 to 30 feet in length. He also said he couldn't see the feet, which seems like a minor detail at first until we remember that special effects maestro Willis O'Brien hid the dinosaur's feet from the camera in order to save on animation time. You couldn't see the tail in the film either, and in Spicer's description, I think its tail was curved around the other side from our view. Beat for beat, Spicer is just recreating the scene from King Kong, right down to the small lamb or animal of some kind in its mouth. Oh, come on, I hear you say. You can't prove George Spicer even saw King Kong.
Except we can. Someone asked him.
He was interviewed just a few months later by journalist Rupert Gould, who even went so far as to note the similarity between Spicer's eyewitness account and the scene from King Kong, which Spicer dutifully confirmed that he'd seen. But Spicer insisted the monster he saw had a much larger and more flexible neck. Well then.
None of this is my original research, by the way.
I'm basically just summarizing Abominable Science, which is my favorite book on cryptozoology, in part because it's written from a decidedly skeptical point of view. All the quotes in this section, from Spicer and the Inverness Courier, they all came from here. For at least a little while, I thought I was doing my own original research about the history and creation of the A82 road. But then I saw the endnote at the back of the book explaining everything I had just spent an hour independently confirming. Suffice it to say that anyone still arguing for the existence of Nessie simply doesn't know what's already been debunked.
So there you have it. The Loch Ness Monster didn't inspire Nessie cinema. Ness cinema? It's the other way around, and therefore filmmakers have done more to keep the legend alive than any cryptozoologist. And why shouldn't they?
See, evidence for cryptids is sorely lacking. That is, in fact, the whole reason they're cryptids. Every supposed photo of Nessie is either totally ambiguous or a known fake. The Mokele-mbembe is little more than a collection of young Earth creationists' fairy tales and a dream. The best we've got of Bigfoot is a 57-year-old home movie taken by a notorious fraudster.
The whole field isn't just based on hearsay, it is hearsay.
So in the absence of any real evidence, cinema becomes the only way to visualize that which simply refuses to manifest itself anywhere in the real world. Half of what most people know about cryptids comes from movies anyway. Lots of them are just goofy fun, but others take themselves very seriously.
As an enthusiastic skeptic, I want to know if they're shoring up support for any real-world cryptids. What sort of liberties do they take with the known science?
And perhaps most intriguing of all, how do they compare to real cryptozoologists when they ask their audience to suspend their disbelief?
Everything you think is right is based on a leap of faith the size of Montana.
Yeah, but what if you take that leap?
Part 4. The Western world spent 2 centuries looking for apatosaurs in Africa, and then Sean Young just tweeted it out. Mokele-mbembe is the sort of thing where if you're new to cryptozoology, you've probably never heard of it, but if you've ever so much as heard the word cryptid before, you probably know all about it. It's the poster child for living dinosaurs, a sauropod that supposedly lives in the uncharted swamps of Central Africa, with sightings dating back to the 1700s. Well, stories of sightings anyway. And back then, the stories weren't coming from Central Africa, they were coming from East Africa, Namibia, and the Sahara Desert, because that was the extent of Western colonization at that time. Over the next 2 centuries, as white people moved further inland, so did the alleged territory of Mokele-mbembe. As it suspiciously failed to turn up in any of the areas previously reported, its range shrank from East Africa to Central Africa to a remote region of the Congo to one particular lake within a remote region of the Congo, Lake Tele. By the mid-1980s, organized expeditions had finally reached the south, east, and western shores of Lake Tele, but no living sauropods turned up, at which point the theory became that it only inhabited the north shore.
La-di-fucking-da.
You see where I'm going with this? Mokele-mbembe is less of a theory than it is an expression of Western ignorance. Anything Westerners don't know or understand about Africa can be attributed to this cryptid.
Discover a weird hole on the banks of a river? Mokele-mbembe. See a blip on your little Radio Shack sonar unit in only 8 feet of water? Mokele-mbembe. Find some weird hole in the mud. 3 guesses what you could call it, and the first 2 don't count. And I'll be the first to admit, it's easy to let your imagination run wild with stories of undiscovered dinosaurs when viewing grainy, desaturated aerial footage from 1992. Much harder to do when viewing more modern footage. As far as I know, this is the only high-definition aerial footage of Lake Tele ever taken by someone who was actually there. It was shot by Zach Boyette and Rashi of From Safari Tours on a 3-day visit in 2022. And more than just demonstrating the breathtaking beauty of the Congo rainforest, I think it does a great job of illustrating just how non-mythological this place is. It's certainly remote, to be sure, and according to Boyette, it took Herculean efforts to capture this footage. His own drone was confiscated at the airport, but then his guide was able to borrow a drone from a friend before they entered the jungle. At one point, the drone fell into the lake and had to be retrieved by hand, and by some miracle, this footage was still okay. But more than all of that, this footage proves that Lake Tele isn't some mystical land with mythical creatures roaming the shores. It's a very real place in a very real country with access to aerial drones.
You know who would have found Mokele-mbembe by now if it were really there to find? The Congolese.
Of course, there are indigenous oral traditions about the monster. That is, after all, where the name comes from, the Lingala phrase for one who stops the flow of rivers. But it's hard to say whether any of these stories are meant to be taken literally. Mokele-mbembe could be a spirit, or an animal we already know all about, which the locals do regularly claim, but that hasn't stopped cryptozoologists from inventing a vast mythological ecology for the creature, complete with physical descriptions, diets, and complex breeding, feeding, and social behaviors. And for what it's worth, I'm not saying there couldn't possibly be a sauropod living in Central Africa, and no one would be more excited about its discovery than me. I'm just saying that the burden of proof hasn't been met yet, and the true believers tend to do a pretty terrible job of getting me to suspend my disbelief. Again, it's the filmmakers who tend to do a much better job. Baby Secret of the Lost Legend from 1985 tells the story of paleontologist Susan Loomis, who discovers evidence of sauropod living in Central Africa in the form of an unfossilized vertebra. Her postdoctoral advisor tells her it's just a giraffe bone, but she has her doubts. Yeah, no kidding. Sauropod and giraffe vertebrae look nothing alike. She and her husband George then ask the local Congolese village what they make of it, and the chief describes a beast with poisonous flesh living deep within the rainforest, which happens to look an awful lot like an apatosaur.
Looks like a brontosaurus.
This is taken directly from cryptozoologist accounts, by the way. Cryptozoologists have asked indigenous peoples to draw the Mokele-mbembe, and to hear them tell it, they often draw something very much like a dinosaur. Another story has the indigenous villagers flipping through books with pictures of things like giraffes, elephants, and rhinos in them, only to then dramatically stomp on a picture of a diplodocus. But then I've heard one version of the story where the supposedly uncontacted tribe already knew the word diplodocus, so...
These accounts regularly assure the reader that the indigenous Africans have no reason to lie, that they aren't paid for their stories.
And yet organized expeditions have been entering the Congo for over 100 years with the express purpose of finding a living dinosaur. Locals know the stories that white people want to hear about this thing by now. I'm not saying they're willfully duplicitous, but this insistence that they can only ever tell the literal truth reeks of colonial paternalism to me.
And to say that they aren't paid is just plain false.
Although Mokele-mbembe seeker William Gibbons has insisted that these people have nothing whatsoever to gain from telling stories because we don't pay them, he also has described both financial transactions and monetary disputes between foreign monster hunters and, for example, the residents of the village of Boha near Lake Tele. Microbiologist Roy Mackle led several expeditions into the Congo throughout the 1980s, never found a shred of evidence, and didn't seem to take the hint whenever those he questioned said they didn't know anything about a living dinosaur. Here we were only a few kilometers from Lake Tele, where a Mokele-mbembe had been killed, yet these villagers claimed to know nothing about it. Yeah, no kidding.
The story about one of them being killed, by the way, had been fed to other villages in the vicinity by Mackle himself, who then pitched a fit when other villages wouldn't repeat it.
A full write-up of these expeditions, all of which found nothing, is included in Abominable Science. So Susan and George charter a plane to take them further into the Congo rainforest, and within 24 hours of setting out, they find the Mokele-mbembe. The moment is anticlimactic. Jerry Goldsmith's score is doing all the heavy lifting. It only comes 34 minutes into the film, which isn't like an objectively incorrect amount of time to wait, but there's hardly any buildup and it doesn't really feel like a payoff. And their lack of excitement is downright perplexing. Paleontologist Jose Luis Sanz sums it up in his book Starring T-Rex, Dinosaur Mythology and Popular Culture. One of the most surprising aspects of Baby Secret of the Lost Legend is the paleontologist's lack of amazement at discovering a surviving family of brontosaurs. The entire narrative has a sense of the realistic and the everyday that contrasts markedly with the majority of dinosaur films, and that connects clearly with the cryptozoologic spirit. Contrast that with everyone's favorite dino introduction scene of all time.
It's a dinosaur.
You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
Secret of the Lost Legend carries that distinct lack of enthusiasm throughout the rest of the film. The baby's dad is soon shot dead by Congolese militants, led by Susan's advisor, who sees the dinosaurs as his ticket to fame and fortune, and his mother is shipped upriver back towards civilization. Susan and George try to hide the baby and rescue its mother, but eventually fail at both tasks, which finally leads to a spirited finale in which the two of them are freed and released back into the wild. Presumably they're the last of their kind, which means they're doomed to die, but let's not think too much about that.
For what it's worth, I don't think this film is terrible, so much as just very underwhelming. But what I find so weird about it as a cryptid film is that it doesn't even require dinosaurs. What do I mean by that?
I mean that the discovery, capture, and subsequent rescue of these animals is so matter-of-fact and quotidian that they might as well have been a pair of elephants. In fact, now that I think about it, Operation Dumbo Drop was a much better version of this story, and I can't even watch that one anymore now that I know more than nothing about Vietnamese history.
Thankfully, there's a second headlining film about Mokele-mbembe, and I think it's a marked improvement.
The Dinosaur Project from 2012 is an ambitious, low-budget, found-footage creature feature, which isn't super popular here in the States, owing to the fact that it never got a proper theatrical or home video release. And even though it popped up on several streaming sites while I was writing this video, it sports one of the most laughably janky thumbnails I've ever seen, so it's no wonder it's not more popular. It's especially disappointing given the masterpiece that is the original poster. Yeah, whoever chose this thumbnail over this one shall surely not inherit the kingdom of heaven. The Dinosaur Project follows a group of cryptozoologists and documentarians who travel deep into the Congo rainforest to try and find Mokele-mbembe, theorized here as some sort of marine reptile rather than a sauropod. The film focuses on teenager Luke, the son of expedition leader Jonathan Marchant. Marchant? It's spelled Marchant. Marchant. But he's not French. The son of expedition leader Jonathan Marchant. Martian. That sounds like I'm saying Martian.
Jonathan Marchant.
Luke is a wily one, who's allowed to accompany the expedition to Africa, but forbidden from entering the field, so he stows aboard a helicopter for the final leg of the journey.
First I'm in a helicopter and I'm a stowaway, which is pretty cool. Been flying now for about 90 minutes. Yeah, I don't know how much longer.
What was that?
Luke is caught within hours, but before they can turn the chopper around, they're brought down by a flock of pterosaurs. Whereupon the survivors have to figure out how to stay alive long enough to make it back to civilization.
Come on!
I'll go ahead and say right up front that this film is not like a Shawshank Redemption level masterpiece.
Luke? What's that thing on? No?
She dies before the half-hour mark, by the way. But it is pretty good, especially by the standards of this genre. For one thing, it's probably one of the best edited found footage films I've ever seen. It never cheats the premise by showing us any impossible camera angles, and even goes out of its way to show us the position of each camera before cutting to it. It does a great job of establishing and preserving our sense of spatial awareness. You always know exactly where you and everybody else is within the shot when cutting between perspectives. It's really subtle. Most people might not even notice, but I liked it quite a bit.
And perhaps most important for the purposes of this video, the Dinosaur Project does a great job of getting me to suspend my disbelief.
For one thing, it suggests that Mokele-mbembe is an aquatic reptile like a plesiosaur instead of a sauropod. This is good. I like this a lot. It's much easier to hide in water than it is to hide on land, and the Congo River is the perfect place to do it. It's generally even murkier than Loch Ness, and it's much, much bigger, discharging the equivalent volume of 160 Loch Nesses into the Atlantic Ocean every single second. Much of it isn't navigable by boat either, due to waterfalls and rapids, so nobody's ever scanned the whole thing. In short, Not even God is sure what's down there. One little twist in the story is that they find a whole lot more than just one cryptid. They discover a whole ecosystem of dinosaurs. It's not like the movie goes out of its way to explain how they all managed to stay hidden for so long, and shots like these do tend to stretch my disbelief to the breaking point, but at least the movie suggests that the Congolese government already knows all about them. The government official who accompanies the expedition seems to have known that there were dinosaurs living in the jungle. She just didn't expect to find them here.
You were never meant to come here. I was just supposed to take you to a safe piece of jungle, let you do your filming, and fly you back home.
Like her job is to steer expeditions away from the dinosaurs, which makes as much sense as anything else. Giant ecosystems like this would not be unknown to the countries that house them. The only way for Westerners not to know about them by now is if Africa were deliberately keeping them a secret. And honestly, who could blame her? This one's definitely worth a watch.
Are you sure this isn't the nasty one?
So long as you ignore the awful thumbnail. If you ask me, it's high time someone made a third and possibly final film about Mokele-mbembe. One that injects some real plausibility and excitement into the premise. I mean, as it currently stands, the best film we have about Central African cryptids is probably Congo, and I'm sure we can do better.
Put him on the endangered species list.
You know what, maybe we can't do better than Congo, but then maybe that's why it's so hard to make a great cryptid film of any kind. They've got to walk this very fine line between plausibility and surprise. But then, isn't that the challenge of every screenplay? Part 5. When Belief Isn't Enough. Crypted, from 2022, is a film that, in many ways, is one of the most emblematic cryptid films I've ever seen. But not because it's so good.
I mean, okay. I don't want to lay into it too hard.
I get the sense that the filmmakers were giving it their all in a project that they really believed in, which is more than enough for me to go ahead. Hey, they're introducing the main character by waking him up in his shabby apartment and then giving him writer's block. I know that trick. I did it in my movie.
No, when I say it's emblematic of cryptozoology, what I mean is that the more it explains itself, the more it loses me.
It barrels forth with so much confidence before it ever gets me to suspend my disbelief, even for a second. It tells the story of freelance journalist Max Frome, who teams up with his full-time journalist friend Harriet to investigate several deaths in small-town Maine that have been preliminarily attributed to a bear.
Given the size of the damage, it could be a bear.
But he doubts the official story because, well, he just does.
Yeah, that's kind of odd, isn't it? Bears don't generally attack this close to civilization.
Sure, it's unusual behavior for a bear, but you know what's even more unusual? Bipedal subterranean crocodilians with 50-year migration cycles previously unknown to science, which is what the killer turns out to be. And it's not just that that's what the killer turned out to be, it's that Max calls it before he sees a single shred of physical evidence.
I can't find anything about a reptile that's nocturnal, feeds at one time of year, has a very large but steady migratory pattern, and is big enough to attack a human. Nothing. Tapped out.
Crypted dedicates nearly half of its not insubstantial runtime trying to prove the killings aren't the work of a bear. One eyewitness says he heard it hiss.
It had a kind of a hiss.
Another person never heard it hiss herself, but her father said it did.
He kept going on and on about the hiss getting him.
Harriet then gets a hold of a medical examiner's report that says the attacks were reptilian in nature.
Reptilian? Like a lizard?
Apparently.
But what does reptilian mean exactly? We're never told. Max then grabs some cryptozoology books and quickly theorizes that the murders are being committed by an unknown reptile left over from the early Devonian. Wait, was it Devonian? I can't remember. I'm not gonna have to watch it twice, am I?
Have you ever heard of the Holocene Epic Era?
Okay, Holocene, not Devonian. So Max decides the murders are being committed by an unknown reptile left over from the early Holocene, which means it would have had to evolve from an existing species within just the last 10,000 years, and that it exhibits a cyclical migration pattern that allows it to kill for a few days every fall, and then tunnel over to the next town in order to continue the cycle without arousing suspicion.
By the time it circles back around to the original spot, it's like 7 to 10 years later. So it has a clean slate at that point.
So yeah, as his explanation gets more and more detailed, I'm just sitting there like...
What?
There is some evidence to show that a certain number of the larger creatures began to use the rain as cover to hunt their prey through the thick underbrush of the jungle.
What?
That's gobbledygook. How are we supposed to know from mere fossils whether or not any given species hunted in the rain? And yet this is treated like a huge revelation as to the identity of the killer.
I went to the library this morning and I checked the newspaper weather forecast against the earlier attacks, and to the fucking letter, there was some kind of rainstorm listed.
What?
It hunts in the rain. So what? And the fact that we're supposed to just take it on faith that this thing can tunnel from town to town, eat 3 to 5 people each year, and there not be a single living witness in over half a century? I mean, it's just... How is this any more believable than a bear?
And yet the movie plays it dead serious. It's so sure of itself.
When it finally comes time to confront the sheriff with his theory, Max is downright abusive.
Everything you think is right is based on a leap of faith the size of Montana.
Yeah, but what if you take that leap? Just for a second, what if you open that brick, you call ahead and just explore the idea?
What's wild to me is that the sheriff is already looking for a bear here. It's not like he's called off the search. Max is just angry that he isn't using the word reptile to describe the thing he's hunting.
We are sending a hunting party out tomorrow. So if I'm wrong, and what you say is true, we will know.
Max doesn't even ask him to modify his methods, just his vocabulary.
I'm trying to get you to see what is right the fuck in front of your face!
It is so much fuss for so little muss, which is extremely no, I'm not going to do that.
Which is why I think this film is such a good representation of cryptozoology as a profession. It's emblematic of the unqualified rage that so many cryptozoologists express when you refuse to accept their claims at face value.
Infamously temperamental Bigfoot hunter René Dahinden, who served as the inspiration for Jacques Lafleur in Harry and the Hendersons, said that if Bigfoot was ever finally found, I'd take the scientists by the scruff of their collective necks and rub their goddamn faces in. Actually, I would like to see all the people, the scientists, who have opened their mouths and made their stupid, ignorant statements fired from their jobs. See, he believed that certain...
No, he's not done.
They should totally, absolutely, right then and there, without pension, without anything, just be taken and thrown out the front door. Then and there. My cat does not like that voice, by the way. When I looked up Daniel Loxton's wiki page, I found it had been vandalized by some bitter cryptid truther, who referred to Abominable Science as a lying look at cryptozoology that threatens to bury some of the most amazing creatures that ever lived in the sands of time. Richard Freeman bristles at critiques of his profession. Why is it then that cryptozoology is met with such scorn by mainstream science? After so many new and strange creatures have been discovered, you would think that the lesson would have sunk in. But no, cryptozoology is still rejected as a pseudoscience in many quarters. If one examines the cryptozoology page on Wikipedia, for example, you will find an utterly one-sided diatribe against cryptozoology, with zero arguments in its favor. This is the kind of childish and inaccurate bias that gives the public the wrong idea about cryptozoology. Why is there this hatred and fear of cryptozoology in mainstream science? The answer may simply be fear of controversy.
Fear of controversy, right.
I picked up Freeman's book, Adventures in Cryptozoology, Volume 1, because I heard he was actually one of the more practical, down-to-earth cryptozoologists working in the field today.
But, I mean, I may not know how he stacks up to every other cryptozoologist, but I find his claims to be, not sound. And not just specific claims, but his entire methodology.
In his book, Freeman tells the story of 5 kids who capsized in the Caribbean back in the 1960s, with a sole survivor washing ashore the next day. At first he was in shock, and he claimed he didn't remember anything about what happened. But eventually, he said that their boat had been staved in by a large marine reptile, like a mosasaur. And it's not just that Freeman believes this story. He's free to believe whatever he wants, no matter how outlandish it sounds. But when it comes time to defend it, Freeman cites its very outlandishness as the reason it should be believed. It seems unlikely that he would have made up such a story about the death of his 4 best friends. We shall never know.
Never. Really?
He applies the same logic to the Patterson-Gimlin film. If you were going to fake a film of Bigfoot by using a tall man in an ape suit, where in the equation would you think of adding large hairy breasts?
I don't know, man. Have you seen Tumblr?
Sea serpents get this same sort of credulous validation from him too. Almost every county in Britain with a coastline has had reports of long-necked sea serpents.
Yeah, but that doesn't increase the likelihood of their existence, mate. It actually decreases them the longer we go without finding one.
You've probably heard the phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It's a good rule of thumb.
But that's not how Freeman operates. He seems to think that extraordinary claims are extraordinary evidence.
Are we done? Not quite.
While it's one thing to be a bit too credulous about some outlandish stories, Freeman goes one step further, crossing the line from the merely silly into something that's truly kind of offensive.
Weirdly enough, this is where I gotta put up a content warning for sexual assault, sexual slavery, racism, and murder. On October 19, 1968, the body of Evelyn Consuela Roseman was found at the base of Nevada Fall in Yosemite National Park. It was an exceedingly violent death. I'll let Freeman tell you in his own words the parts that I have fact-checked against other sources. Investigators determined that she had been thrown off the 594-foot waterfall. Her trousers had been pulled down and her top pulled up. More disturbingly, there were bloodless lacerations inside her vagina, showing that the body had been sexually interfered with after death. The horrific story begs the question just what has the strength to pick up a full-grown woman and hurl her so far off the edge.
Different sources give different estimates as to how far from the base of the fall her body was discovered. I've read anywhere from 50 to 200 feet, but multiple sources also say that she was moved post-mortem. So how far away she was from the base of the fall doesn't actually indicate the strength of her murderer, which is the only basis Freeman has to conclude that a fucking Sasquatch did it.
Freeman breathlessly concludes, DNA profiling did not exist until the 1980s, but if it had existed back in 1968, I would guess that the samples they took would not be from anything you and I would call human.
Really? You would guess? Why? Why does Richard Freeman need this to be the work of Bigfoot? He's not even reporting any eyewitness testimony this time. He just came across a story about a woman being murdered, her body desecrated, and he went, yeah, I can work with that. It's hard to overstate just how mind-bogglingly distasteful, really just downright offensive it is, that anyone would use such a horrifying story just to try and pitch their harebrained conjectures about Sasquatch.
There's a post by Hayley Stevens on her blog hayleyisaghost.co.uk, which sums up my feelings about this really well. I'll put a link in the description.
I believe that Richard Freeman is a breathtakingly credulous buffoon, a 30 clown car pileup of baseless absurdities wrapped in a smug, self-righteous cluelessness, who would sooner piss on his own head than admit that it wasn't raining. But at the end of the day, that is just my opinion. If I wanted to prove that that's what he is, I'd have to find a case of him confidently claiming that a real-life crime involved the work of a cryptid, which was then conclusively falsified through DNA evidence. That's what I'd need if I wanted to be sure. So let me tell you about Zana.
To hear Freeman tell it, Zana was an almasty, sort of like the Russian or Caucasian Bigfoot. Here's her story in his own words. In 1850, a female almasty was captured near the isolated mountain village of Takhina in Abkhazia. She was 6 feet 9 inches tall and covered with reddish hair. She was taken to the farm of Edgi Ganaba and was at first savage. She was kept in a stockade. After a while she became tame and was named Zana, meaning dark. Okay, this is already setting off my bullshit detector. There's just too much detail here. It's too specific. Full names, exact figures, and precise years. This is too easy to fact check for us to still be talking about the possibility that it's real, right? Zana had a weakness for alcohol, and if she got a hold of it, would drink until insensible. In this condition, she was raped by a number of village men. Zana became mother of a number of hybrid children.
Okay, wait, stop. The story is, it's going off the rails. Human Bigfoot hybrid babies born in specific towns?
And don't think I didn't notice the subtle victim blaming here.
This does not pass the sniff test. And we already know Freeman is susceptible to believing wild stories at face value. Would he really be repeating all of these lurid details without bothering to fact check them first?
Zana died in about 1890, but her youngest son, Kowit, died in the 1950s. His skull was unearthed in the 1970s and kept at the Darwin Museum in Moscow until it was purchased by Russian cryptozoologist Igor Burtsev.
We have his skull? Okay, well, let's test it. Like, why are we even still debating this? Let's just put this to rest.
Bryan Sykes, professor of human genetics of Oxford University, secured a tooth from the skull of Kowit. Professor Sykes and another geneticist are still working on the sample. I await the results with bated breath.
Okay, so the results are still pending at the time of publication.
Freeman awaits the results with bated breath.
Not me, though. I don't have to wait for the results. And neither do you. Because if the story is true, every word exactly as Freeman tells it, then we already know that Zana wasn't an Almasty, because she gave birth to her rapist's baby. Humans are not interfertile with any species except other humans, which means Zana was human. It's as simple as that. The story is its own refutation.
If Zana was impregnated by her captors, then she was a victim of sexual slavery, not Bigfoot.
Which means Freeman is once again using the real-life story of a woman who suffered terrible tortures and disgraceful desecrations in order to bolster his own crackpot theories about cryptids. Which isn't a lot of times, but it's weird that it happened twice. But then I did say I wanted proof, right? Conclusively falsified through DNA evidence. That's what I said. And you know what happened since the publication of Freeman's book? They published this study.
Now, as far as I can tell, geneticist Bryan Sykes never published his findings in any peer-reviewed journal. He published them in a book, Bigfoot, Yeti, and the Last Neanderthal, a geneticist's search for modern ape men, in which he confirms that Zana was definitely not a Neanderthal, as some have claimed, but then never actually tests whether or not she was Homo sapiens. He only confirms that she was 100% sub-Saharan African, and then spends the last few pages of the chapter waffling back and forth about whether she was a modern human or merely a subspecies of human that exited Africa over 150,000 years ago, with heavy leanings towards the subspecies theory. She was certainly a member of the genus Homo. That much was certain from the fact that she produced healthy, fertile children. Zana may have been in the genus Homo without being fully Homo sapiens. The thing is, though, Sykes has no genetic basis for concluding this. He didn't test whether or not her DNA matched Homo sapiens. This is entirely based on mere descriptions of Zana and her behavior, like the report that she never tried to communicate with her captors, or that she could allegedly outrun a horse, or that she supposedly had a long hairy mane running down her back. There aren't any known photographs of Zana, and no contemporary illustrations. Everything you see online is an artist's impression, which almost all tend to render her as some sort of primitive hominid. But personally, I have no trouble believing that these details about her appearance and behavior were just completely made up. But Sykes summarily dismisses the theory that she could have been an escaped African slave based on these details alone. Although the slave theory might explain her African DNA, it certainly does not account for her remarkable appearance. And eventually he concludes, the well-researched contemporary description suggests to me that Zana had nothing to do with the modern world.
So Bryan Sykes, famous geneticist, concluded that Zana wasn't a modern human even though he ran no genetic tests to determine that. This isn't Sykes' study. This is a second study published by Margarian et al. In 2021, which tested the DNA of Zana's son and Zana herself, whose remains were discovered in a local Abkhazian graveyard within the last decade. And at long last, they finally concluded that Zana was a human. You already know a human being.
In contrast to the speculations that Zana might have been a female Almasty, we provide definitive genome-wide data to put an end to the accounts of her as anything but a human woman. Zana was likely of Eastern African descent. We hypothesize that her lineage could have arrived in the territory of present-day Abkhazia as a result of the slave trade practiced between the 16th to 19th centuries CE by the Ottoman Empire.
So there you have it. Zana wasn't a cryptid, she wasn't a subspecies, she was a modern descendant of African slaves. Actually, she herself was an African slave, not some relic Bigfoot for Freeman to defame and demean. Something he'd have known already if he didn't approach stories of human trafficking and sexual slavery with the same empathy and understanding of a Legend of Boggy Creek cosplayer with delusions of grandeur.
This is why nobody likes you guys. You're not politically incorrect, you're just incorrect in the general sense. This study seems to be keenly aware of the specific liberties that cryptozoologists have taken with Zana's story, and ends with a note on ethics, which sums up my own feelings on the subject pretty well. Zana was deprived of her basic human rights and treated as a slave. She was kept in captivity, likely forced to have sexual relations with local men, and worked in forced labor conditions. Our study intends both to reveal the true human nature of Zana and grant her and her descendants' remains the dignity they deserve. All permissions for excavations in the 1960s and 1970s and for DNA analyses were provided by the relevant authorities.
For what it's worth, this video isn't meant to be like a takedown of Richard Freeman. He just happened to be the one professional cryptozoologist whose book I read for this video. It could have been any of them. In fact, in my experience, this is what usually happens whenever you drill down too hard into a specific cryptozoologist's pet theories. They all fall apart under close scrutiny.
William Gibbons is a young Earth creationist who spent decades searching for the Mokele-mbembe because he thinks it will disprove evolution. Roy Mackle was one of the few practicing cryptozoologists with an actual PhD, but it wasn't in a relevant field, it was in microbiology, and even after he conducted extensive surveys of Loch Ness, he never accepted any null results, and believed to his dying day that the loch was home to a relic population of basilosaurs. Basilosaurs.
Lots of cryptozoologists also have this weird conservative streak in them, and I don't just mean the young Earth creationists.
Freeman is apparently a big Doctor Who fan. It's in his author's bio on Amazon, and he raved about it on a podcast in 2017.
Well, I first got interested in strange animals, like was mentioned earlier on, through watching Doctor Who, the world's longest-running science fiction serial. And I watched that growing up. It started in 1963. And it's still going strong today.
But then here he is in 2019 on a different podcast, having apparently changed his mind.
But it peaked in the 70s with John Pertwee and Tom Baker. It was brilliant. It was a million miles away from the absolute excrement that is being passed off as Doctor Who today. Now it's just woke garbage where every single episode, they're not interested in science fiction or horror. They just want to ram political correctness down your throat, and it's a travesty and shame on the stinking BBC.
I wonder what happened between 2017 and 2019.
So at some point in the last 15 minutes, we stopped talking about dinosaur films, and I honestly don't know if I've justified the digression, but I know why it was important to me. I wanted to explain where I stand on these subjects, and where I don't stand on them, because as you can plainly see, some people get really weird about this stuff.
Cryptozoology has a long shared history with colonialism, and all that entails. My personal theory is that a lot of Westerners cling to these stories because they remind them of the so-called glory days, when white men strode where they pleased and took what they wished, without any consideration or consequence.
But that doesn't mean it's not an interesting subject, or that there isn't anything to learn and enjoy. I like to think that I approach the subject at least a little differently.
25 years ago, I heard a story about a supposed dinosaur living in Central Africa, and now I'm reading Marxist analyses of the Congo independence movement.
I am fascinated by cryptozoology, but only as a confirmed skeptic. And I guess you might be wondering, about an hour into the video, what sort of cryptid films a confirmed skeptic would even like? So glad you asked, because it's time to talk about my 3 all-time favorite cryptid films.
Part 6. Finally. Some good fucking cryptid films. Q the Winged Serpent from 1982 is not generally known as a cryptid film, but it still satisfies all the basic criteria. A previously unknown dragon-like monster, which is apparently the real-life inspiration for the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl, takes up residence inside the spire of the Chrysler Building and promptly starts eating people across the rooftops of New York. But dealing with Q is only half the problem. Dealing with Michael Moriarty is the other. Moriarty plays a low-level grifter who stumbles upon the monster's lair inside the Chrysler building, and then uses that knowledge as leverage against the NYPD, basically ransoming the monster's whereabouts in exchange for a pardon for all his petty crimes, and $1 million.
Immunity for the job you got me on now and for anything else that might crop up on me. You're beautiful, do you know that? You think we give you immunity for crimes we don't even know about? Yeah, didn't Ford pardon Nixon for anything and everything? I'm just asking for a Nixon-like pardon.
This film is notable for dedicating less than 2 minutes of total screen time to the actual monster, and yet still manages to be as fun and engaging as any Jurassic World film. Some might even say more engaging.
Me. I'm saying that.
A little cue goes a long way. The back and forth between Moriarty and the two lead investigators as they try and track down a flying monster whose existence is not yet proven provides the bulk of the drama, and I submit that it's as funny as it is tense.
$1 million in cash, tax-free. Jesus Christ. And you pay the taxes on us. I suppose if you pay the taxes, I gotta pay the tax on the tax, but you can work that out with the IRS. I have never paid tax in my life, and I'm not about to start now.
And also, this shouldn't go unstated, the two lead investigators are played by David Carradine and Richard Roundtree.
As far as the cryptid angle is concerned, this film wouldn't work if it couldn't sell us on the idea that this creature could somehow be hiding out somewhere in New York. And I happen to think it does a pretty good job.
1982 was an era before ubiquitous security cameras or high-definition cell phones, or any definition cell phones. When the monster plucks people off of random rooftops, the only witnesses are peeping toms and shell-shocked office assistants. Who's to say what anyone saw, or where it went after each attack? And anyone who heads up into the spire of the Chrysler building gets eaten. This is where I think the reduced screen time of the monster actually helps. We mostly only get impressions of each attack. They're over so quick we're left wondering what it is we actually saw, and it's not hard to imagine any witness thinking the same. Did I see the giant living embodiment of Quetzalcoatl eat that poor sunbather? Who knows? In the end, after Moriarty gets terms that he can agree with and identifies the monster's lair, an army of officers climbs up into the spire and then lets loose with a volley of machine guns when it returns home to roost. A scene which was filmed at the actual Chrysler building and reportedly caused a fair bit of concern for the uninformed public below.
If I were still organizing movie nights like I did in college, I would want to pair this one up with a Roland Emmerich Godzilla.
I'd call it movies about giant reptilian monsters hiding out in Manhattan which reproduce without any living mates that feature a final shot of an undiscovered egg ominously cracking open, thereby teasing a sequel that never actually happened. Night. Incident at Loch Ness from 2004 is my all-time favorite Nessie movie.
I bet you thought I forgot about this one when I was running through all those Loch Ness monster films before. Well, I didn't forget, I was saving it.
It tells the story of famed director and sometimes actor Werner Herzog, played by famed director and sometimes actor Werner Herzog, who travels to Loch Ness to make a documentary about Nessie as a purely cultural phenomenon.
This whole thing about Loch Ness is more or less a figment of our fantasy. And I like that much more than the real monster.
But then writer, director, and occasional actor Zach Penn, played by writer, director, and occasional actor Zach Penn, tries to hijack the production and turn it into a schlocky, ancient alien-style TV special.
That incredible girl pulled her boiler suits out, and then she's with the tiniest bikinis I ever seen in my life.
And Zach, why exactly am I wearing a G-string bikini?
Because you are a model and you're a sonar operator.
If the IMDb trivia is to be believed, real-life Playboy model Katana Baker offered to do this scene naked in order to help with video sales, but apparently Zach Penn pulled a Miss Honey.
Oh, no thank you, dear.
Zach Penn directed this movie, by the way. That's a common misconception. People think it was Herzog, but it was actually Penn. Herzog eventually gets wise to Penn amidst a series of increasingly hilarious cut corners.
It's a hoax. It is just a hoax.
I think you're really overreacting.
No, I'm smelling a rat against the wind. When it's there, I smell it, and that's it. I just smell it.
Jesus. I don't know what to say.
And in the midst of this battle for artistic integrity...
This is the single most chaotic production I've ever seen.
Thanks, that's helpful.
And I've been on a couple of difficult ones.
They get attacked by the real Loch Ness monster.
What was that?
This film is just... it's perfect.
The perfect cryptid film, the perfect mockumentary, the perfect movie about Hollywood film production, and one of the only Loch Ness Monster films actually filmed at Loch Ness. I love how Zach Penn so thoroughly commits to playing such a skeezy version of himself, really nothing like what he is in real life from what I've read, and yet he allows Herzog to play himself exactly as the public perceives him.
The story of me directing Kinski with a gun pointed at him from behind the camera, it's just a fabrication, a myth of the media, and I'm just tired of defending myself against it. It has its own life.
It takes, I don't know, it takes some form of courage to depict yourself like this.
One of the things I like about being a producer is, you know, you don't take as much shit from people. You say, here's what I want. You know, fire that writer.
And in terms of cryptid cinema, I love that they make no attempt whatsoever to explain how they found Nessie.
You know, they're saying, show us the evidence. I'm saying, show us the non-evidence. Give us one piece. You know, where are the books written about the non-evidence?
Granted, it's a mockumentary, so they don't really have to. But I love the way that they play up the fact that she's discovered through sheer irony. They finally found her because they weren't looking for her.
When I look back and I hear people talk about suffering, I say to myself, who suffered more than I did? I mean, other than the people who died. I mean, obviously they suffered more because they're dead, but you could make the argument that they're dead, so they're not really dealing with it. Whereas I live with the guilt and I live with the sadness.
The last film I want to talk about today is The Last Dinosaur from 1977. Fitting, right? It tells the story of Maston Thrust, the world's richest man, who finances all sorts of expeditions to remote regions of the globe in order to feed his obsession with big game hunting. He's bagged it all: elephants, lions, gazelles, and then the lone survivor of one of his expeditions from high above the Arctic Circle comes back from the polar ice cap with tales of a living, breathing tyrannosaur.
As far as we know, it was Tyrannosaurus Rex, the largest carnivore that ever lived.
Maston and a team of experts then launch a second expedition, re-drill through the polar ice, and emerge within a warm primordial swamp filled with all sorts of preserved prehistoric life. Pterosaurs, triceratops, whatever this thing is. Some sort of archelon. And a lone Tyrannosaurus Rex, which proves to be fiercely territorial and promptly trashes their ride, thereby stranding them. And where most of the crew struggles to survive long enough to figure out how to repair their ship and head home, Maston Thrust becomes obsessed with bagging the last living dinosaur.
I will hunt that thing down, and I will kill it.
The Last Dinosaur has a pretty bad reputation, even amongst dinosaur film fans.
Most of the plot summaries you find on YouTube spend half their time roasting it, but I don't think every common critique is all that fair. The special effects suck.
Well, the special effects are very much of their time, to be sure, but I wouldn't say that they suck.
I personally think they're just as good as they need to be. Like, they're not so bad that they break the fourth wall or anything. They don't pull you out of the movie. Here, look, when the team gets charged by by this thing. Yeah, the suit looks pretty cheap, but if I could direct your attention to the shot as a whole, this shot is a composite. They film the actors and the monsters separately and then splice them together in post. But I can't tell where the splice is. The effect is done really well. It might not even be a composite at all. It might be rear screen projection for all I know. Other people take issue with certain little details, like when the T-Rex's forehead caves in when it's struck by a catapult. Well, clearly that's just a rubber suit. Well, sure, you can tell it's a rubber suit, but can't you tell that this is CGI? Just because you can tell it's an effect doesn't mean it's a bad effect. I guess what I'm trying to say is that cheap isn't necessarily the same thing as bad. I don't know, like rubber or not, it looks like it hurt. And ultimately, isn't that what's most important about the scene?
It's not like the movie doesn't have any problems.
The pacing, for one, is positively glacial. It's an hour and 46 minutes long, but it really feels like 3. Here, watch them load this catapult in real time. It takes over a minute. Should I play the whole thing? Would you navigate away? Do I have to put a wait till the end little thing like they do on TikTok? Yeah, so the pacing's bad. But even then, most critics don't say the pacing is bad. They say things like, it takes too long for the dinosaurs to show up. And that's a completely different issue. The right time for the dinosaur to show up should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And I think 30 minutes for this one is a-okay. The first half hour is spent fleshing out the characters, well, 2 of them anyway, and building up anticipation for the mission.
4 minutes to go.
And besides, it's not like other, and frankly better dinosaur films don't make you wait even longer for the dinosaurs to show up. It's fine if you still think 30 minutes is too long, but I don't think we should pretend like how long you have to wait before the dinosaurs show up is like an intrinsic measurement of good cinema. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I like giving films credit for what they are. Not for nothing, but this is one of the most ambitious films we've talked about. Not just in terms of special effects, but in story, in its potential to make you feel something. Because it's not just a story about dinosaurs. It's a story about people, which just so happens to have dinosaurs in it. Same goes for all the great dinosaur films. I think Maston Thrust is a pretty compelling character. Paradoxically, he's a self-promoting, sexist egomaniac who's also happy to put himself in harm's way for the sake of others, and treats the lives of the other members of the team as something he wants to preserve. Who expresses genuine remorse whenever someone turns up dead.
This 40-foot monster with a brain the size of a dried pea has just destroyed a man with one of the great minds of this century.
As we watch him plot and scheme to kill the T-Rex with just as much ingenuity and gumption as the others plot and scheme their escape. And seriously, there isn't anything Thrust won't do to try and bag this poor Tyrannosaur.
I have been stabbed, shot, poisoned, frozen, hung, and burned.
But over the course of the film, Thrust slowly transforms into one of the rarest forms of movie protagonists, an asshole we can sympathize with. The scientific plausibility of the narrative is notably nonsense. There are no pockets of warm prehistoric jungle hiding somewhere in the Arctic, and we even knew that in 1977. But scientific plausibility doesn't determine whether or not a film is noteworthy or interesting or valuable. Not to me, anyway. And not to most cryptozoologists. I'm talking about the good ones, too. The people who acknowledge that these stories probably have some basis in fact, but that we do not have to accept them at face value. My 2 current favorite voices in cryptozoology, besides Donald Prothero and Daniel Loxton, are both online. Trey the Explainer has been making fantastic videos about cryptids for years, and Legendary Cryptids on Twitter is a truly encyclopedic resource. Better than most cryptozoology wikis as far as I'm concerned, and much more interactive. They helped me source several of the cryptid illustrations in this video to make sure that none of them were generated by AI. Cryptozoology, as far as I'm concerned, isn't much of an ecological, zoological, or biological field, but it's a very interesting anthropological and sociological field, which is how most cryptid enthusiasts tend to treat it. We know that the world has plenty of unanswered questions and surprises waiting for us, and we don't have to make up the answers before they arrive. Here's a study from 2007 in which scientists from MIT scanned the entire length of Loch Ness and focused on several sites that had yielded possible sightings of Nessie on previous scans, in which they basically confirmed that they were all misidentifications of otherwise normal phenomenon, like shale outcroppings or fallen logs. But while they were down there, they found a random bullfrog at 325 feet, and no one knows what it was doing or how it survived down there? There's a lot of theories as to what the Loch Ness Monster is. A giant eel, sturgeon, seals, misidentified boat wakes, logs bobbing at the surface. But if you ask me, this is Nessie.
And then I saw her face. I'm a believer.
So see, the world still has plenty of secrets, and we don't have to cling to the least credible explanations. In the words of Darren Naish, Today, the complete absence of convincing evidence for cryptids leads me mostly to regard cryptozoology as a hybrid subject that, while sometimes incorporating information from animals at its core, is more to do with how humans perceive and describe the world. Why do we tell stories about undiscovered creatures living out there in the world? Well, there are a lot of reasons. But you better believe that each and every one of them is really just a story about ourselves.
Shoot it! Look, look. I know, but look, it's floating away. It's floating away. Look, it's perfect! It's perfect!
And if any working cryptozoologists are still watching and you want to shut me up forever, then all you have to do is to find literally anything.
I'm gonna win ya. I'm gonna get you, get you, get you.